Ethan Cross never imagined his life would take such a bizarre turn. He was just an ordinary delivery man, spending his days riding through the city on his old motorbike, making ends meet with small packages and food orders. His life seemed destined to remain simple and uneventful, until one fateful morning, when he was summoned to the headquarters of Sterling Enterprises, the powerful financial empire led by Isabella Sterling. Isabella, famously known as the Ice Queen of the business world, sat regally behind a massive oak desk, her cold eyes fixed on him with razor-sharp intensity. Without a single word of preamble, she tossed a folder onto the desk. Ethan hesitated before opening it, only to feel his heartbeat falter. Inside lay the results of a DNA test, boldly declaring that he was the father of the child growing inside her. Shock rippled through him. It made no sense. He had never shared any connection with Isabella Sterling. Stammering, Ethan tried to deny the accusation, but Isabella cut him off before he could utter more than a few words. Her voice, firm and unyielding, carried the weight of a final verdict: "You will take responsibility. From this day forward, you will be my husband, at least on paper." She slid a meticulously drafted marriage contract toward him, its clauses leaving him no room to escape. Ethan stared at the contract, his emotions in turmoil. Part of him burned with humiliation at being treated like a pawn in the hands of such a powerful woman. Yet another part of him sensed there was something more behind this sudden accusation, something Isabella wasn't telling him. Cornered by the seemingly irrefutable evidence, he had no choice but to sign his name, sealing his role as her reluctant contract husband. In that moment, Ethan had no idea that this forced decision would thrust him into a ruthless game of power, deception, and feelings far deeper than he ever anticipated. Beneath the plain uniform of a delivery man, Ethan Cross carried a past no one around him could imagine. Only a year ago, he had stood at the pinnacle of power, a financial tycoon whose name alone could shake the markets. He had built an empire with intelligence, precision, and an instinct for risk that few could rival. But the higher one climbs, the sharper the daggers aimed at their back. His most trusted associate, Leo Sterling, had orchestrated his downfall. What Ethan believed to be a routine business trip turned into a carefully staged accident. The brakes of his car failed on a rain-slick highway, sending him plunging into darkness. That night, Ethan Cross, the mogul, died, yet fate had other plans. When he opened his eyes, he was no longer in his penthouse, but in the cramped apartment of another Ethan Cross, a struggling delivery man with little more than debt to his name. The body was weak, the life pathetic, but the mind inside it was still his. He had returned, though not as the man the world once feared. Worse still, this new life came with chains of its own. He was married to Tiffany Miller, a woman who had once dreamed of wealth and prestige but ended up shackled to a poor husband she despised. Together with her mother, Karen, Tiffany treated Ethan as little more than a servant. Every day was filled with scorn, demands, and humiliation. His meager wages were taken to fund Tiffany's vanity, while Karen berated him for not being man enough to provide. Ethan endured it all in silence, not because he was powerless, but because he was waiting. He had awoken with memories sharper than ever, with the knowledge of secrets, investments, and vulnerabilities that could rebuild an empire from ashes. More importantly, he carried a burning need for vengeance. Leo Sterling had not only betrayed him but also stolen everything he had built. One day, Ethan would reclaim it all. For now, the world saw him as nothing more than a poor delivery man, a failure in the eyes of his in-laws. But behind his quiet gaze, the soul of a fallen titan stirred, preparing for the moment he would rise again. Ethan returned to the Miller household with a calmness that startled Tiffany and her mother, Karen. For years they had been used to seeing him bend his head, swallowing every insult, every unreasonable demand. But the man who stood before them now carried himself with quiet authority, his eyes cold and unwavering. "I want a divorce," Ethan said flatly, sliding a set of papers onto the table. His tone carried no trace of hesitation, no room for negotiation. Tiffany's eyes widened before narrowing into a glare. A divorce? You think you can just walk away after wasting my youth? Her voice rose in pitch, shrill with indignation. Karen immediately jumped in, pointing a finger at Ethan with righteous fury. If you want to leave my daughter, you'll pay for it. $100,000 in compensation, or don't even dream of walking out that door. For a moment, Ethan almost laughed. They still thought he was the same man they could bully and extort. Calmly, he reached into his jacket and pulled out his phone. With a few taps, a series of photos and messages appeared on the screen. Tiffany entangled with another man, laughing, kissing, her betrayal captured in undeniable detail. The room fell silent. Tiffany's face drained of color. She staggered forward, trying to snatch the phone, but Ethan pulled it back effortlessly. Save your excuses, he said coldly. The evidence speaks louder than your lies. If I were cruel, I could hand this over to the court and make sure you walk away with nothing. Karen sputtered, at a loss for words, her usual venom replaced by shock. Tiffany's lips trembled as her bravado crumbled. She knew she was cornered. With no other choice, she snatched the pen and signed the divorce papers, her hand shaking with fury and humiliation. Ethan took the signed documents, his expression unreadable. This is the last time either of you will see me. From today on, we have nothing to do with each other. His voice was final, each word a blade cutting through the ties of the past. Without another glance, he turned and walked out of the Miller house. The chapter of suffering, scorn, and false love was closed forever. For the first time in years, Ethan felt free, and ready to reclaim the life that had been stolen from him. The day Ethan set foot inside Isabella Sterling's mansion, he felt as if he had crossed into another universe. The estate was vast, lined with marble columns and glass walls that gleamed under the morning sun. Every corner radiated wealth, power, and the unmistakable aura of its owner. To Ethan, who had lived in cramped apartments and endured constant humiliation, the contrast was staggering. Yet his eyes remained steady. He had been here before, in another life, in another form, and opulence no longer impressed him. Isabella awaited him in the grand study, seated gracefully in a tailored black dress that accentuated her commanding presence. On the desk before her lay the marriage contract, prepared and sealed by the best legal minds money could buy. Without preamble, she slid the document toward him. Sign this, and you'll have $10 million, she said, her voice cool, detached, as though she were discussing an ordinary business merger. It's more than enough for someone like you. Ethan glanced at the contract, then lifted his gaze to meet hers. For a moment, silence stretched between them, sharp and tense. Finally, he spoke, his tone calm yet carrying a weight that caught her off guard. 10 million? That's pocket change compared to what you truly value. Her brows arched in surprise. And what exactly do you think I value? I don't want your money, Ethan said, pushing the papers back across the desk. What I want is 1% of Sterling Enterprises. The room chilled instantly. Isabella's carefully constructed mask of indifference faltered as she studied him, as if trying to decipher whether he was insane or extraordinarily bold. 1%, she repeated slowly. Do you even realize what you're asking for? That share is worth far more than 10 million. Ethan leaned back slightly, unbothered by her sharp tone. Then you understand why money means nothing to me. I'm not here to be bought. If you want this contract marriage to work, you'll treat me as more than just a pawn. Otherwise, I walk away. For the first time in years, Isabella found herself challenged. She narrowed her eyes, but a flicker of intrigue glimmered beneath the frost. Against her instincts, she signed. The game had begun, not of love, but of power, where every move could shift the balance of an empire. On his first official day as Isabella Sterling's husband, Ethan did something that left her speechless. He put on the old green delivery uniform he had worn for years. While the mansion's wardrobe offered tailored suits worth a fortune, he chose the simple, faded fabric of an ordinary worker. "You're going to walk into Sterling Enterprises dressed like that?" Isabella asked, her tone sharp, her eyes narrowing. Ethan only smiled faintly. "Why not? People underestimate what they see. Sometimes that's the best armor." And so, side by side, they entered the gleaming skyscraper that was Sterling Enterprises. The sight of the icy CEO walking in with a man in delivery clothes rippled through the company like wildfire. Executives exchanged bewildered glances, employees whispered in hushed tones, and the boardroom nearly erupted when Isabella introduced Ethan as her husband. But the greatest reaction came from Leo Sterling. Seated confidently at the far end of the boardroom, Leo nearly choked on his own composure. To everyone else, he appeared annoyed, perhaps insulted. Yet Ethan saw more. He saw the flicker of recognition, the brief panic in Leo's eyes before the mask returned. It was the same man who had orchestrated his death, now staring at him without realizing the delivery boy before him carried the soul of the very tycoon he had betrayed. Leo sneered, his words dripping with disdain. "Isabella, this man? You brought a courier into a board meeting? Are we running a corporation or a charity?" The room chuckled uneasily, some siding with Leo, others waiting to see Isabella's reaction. But Ethan leaned forward, his voice calm yet cutting through the laughter like steel. "Funny how quickly some forget where they started. Everyone delivers something, whether it's food, goods, or, in your case, betrayal." The remark silenced the room. Leo's smirk faltered for just an instant, enough for Ethan to know he had struck a nerve. From that day, the boardroom became a battlefield. Isabella's cold composure shielded Ethan from open dismissal, but every move he made was under scrutiny. Leo plotted, testing him, waiting for a mistake. Ethan, however, remained unshaken. Beneath the disguise of an ordinary man, he was weaving his way back into the empire that had once been his, this time determined to expose Leo piece by piece. Weeks into his new role as Isabella's contract husband, Ethan finally saw his first real opportunity to prove himself. Sterling Enterprises was struggling with a failing asset, Sunstone Galleria, a once ambitious shopping complex that had drained millions in investment yet bled losses month after month. Executives had tried everything: advertising campaigns, celebrity endorsements, flash sales, yet nothing stopped the decline. The board whispered that the project was doomed. Even Isabella, usually unshakable, found herself at an impasse point one evening. Ethan joined her as she reviewed endless reports in her private study. Numbers, charts, and projections cluttered the desk, but they all told the same bleak story. Isabella rubbed her temples in frustration. "It's useless. Sunstone Galleria is a sinking ship." Ethan leaned over, studying the files with calm curiosity. Where the board saw dead weight, he saw overlooked details. "You're all looking at this from the top down," he said. "But I've walked those streets every day as a delivery man. I know what customers see, and what they avoid." Intrigued despite herself, Isabella allowed him to continue. Ethan outlined his ideas: a glass-covered walkway connecting the mall directly to the subway station to capture commuter traffic, replacing the stale elevator music with energetic playlists to change the atmosphere, scattering the food court into multiple smaller hubs to spread activity across the building, and partnering with food delivery apps to offer exclusive discounts, ensuring the mall's restaurants reached not only foot traffic but households across the city. At first, Isabella raised an eyebrow, skeptical. But as Ethan spoke with quiet conviction, she realized these weren't wild guesses, they were practical, grounded in experience, and refreshingly innovative. You're suggesting we treat the mall like a living space, not just a storehouse of brands, she murmured. Implementation began cautiously, yet results came faster than anyone anticipated. Foot traffic surged once the subway walkway opened, young crowds flocked to the lively atmosphere, and restaurants reported record sales boosted by delivery partnerships. Within months, Sunstone Galleria transformed from a dying liability into one of Sterling Enterprises' most promising turnarounds. Isabella watched the numbers rise, but more than that, she watched Ethan. For the first time, the delivery man she had forced into marriage appeared not as a burden, but as an enigma, someone with insight, resolve, and a mind far sharper than she had ever expected. And though she would never admit it aloud, Isabella Sterling found herself beginning to respect him. The success of Sunstone Galleria had barely settled when a new storm loomed on the horizon. Sterling Enterprises was approached by Blackstone Capital, a notorious private equity firm known in the industry as a vulture fund. Their reputation was clear: they preyed on struggling companies, promising investment but ultimately stripping them of assets until nothing remained. To Isabella's board, however, Blackstone appeared as a lifeline, an opportunity to expand further after the mall's revival. Ethan's instincts screamed otherwise. And when he saw Leo Sterling spearheading the negotiations, his suspicions sharpened into certainty. Leo had aligned himself with Blackstone, dangling the company's future on a thread of poisoned promises. At the signing meeting, the atmosphere was thick with anticipation. Executives whispered about the millions to be injected, the media coverage, the prestige. Isabella, though cautious, seemed pressured by the board's excitement. The contract lay open on the table, pens ready. Blackstone's representatives smiled like wolves in tailored suits. Ethan sat quietly beside Isabella, appearing once again like the unremarkable husband in a delivery uniform. But his eyes scanned the agreement, catching subtle clauses buried in legal jargon. One provision in particular stood out, a trigger condition that, if activated, would transfer a controlling share of Sterling Enterprises directly into Blackstone's hands. It was a trap, one Isabella might not see until it was far too late. Just as Isabella reached for the pen, Ethan made his move. With calculated clumsiness, he accidentally knocked over a bowl of hot soup from the catering tray, spilling it across the contract. Gasps filled the room. Documents were yanked away, tempers flared, and the meeting descended into chaos. "Are you insane?" Leo hissed, his composure cracking. "You've ruined everything." Ethan merely offered a calm apology, shrugging as though he truly were the careless delivery man everyone assumed. But the delay he had created was enough. Sterling's legal team insisted on reprinting and reviewing the documents. That night, away from the watchful eyes of Blackstone, they uncovered the hidden clause. Shock rippled through the board as they realized the disaster that had nearly befallen them. For Isabella, the revelation was sobering. Without Ethan's interference, she might have signed away her family's empire. She turned to him with a new, unsettled respect, though suspicion still lingered. Who exactly was this man she had dragged into her world, a mere pawn, or a strategist capable of saving an empire from ruin? Peace never lasted long for Ethan. Just as the threat of Blackstone Capital had been averted, ghosts from his discarded life returned to haunt him. One morning, the gates of Isabella's mansion opened to reveal Tiffany and her mother, Karen, striding in with false confidence and venom on their tongues. They wasted no time. In front of Isabella and several staff, Tiffany sneered, "This man is nothing but trash. Do you know what kind of loser you brought into your home? He lived off my family, contributed nothing, and left us in ruins." Karen chimed in, her voice shrill and self-righteous. "Isabella Sterling, you've been deceived. This so-called husband is a parasite who deserves nothing but contempt." Isabella listened in cold silence, her expression unreadable. But Ethan, far from rattled, let them speak until their insults became repetitive. Then he stepped forward, his calm demeanor slicing through their noise. "Interesting," he said evenly, "that you claim to be victims when the truth paints a different picture." He pulled out his phone, projecting news headlines onto the large screen in the lounge. There, in bold letters, was the breaking story: financial conman Rick Vance arrested by FBI. Ethan turned his gaze on Tiffany. "You abandoned our marriage to throw yourself at Rick Vance, thinking he'd make you wealthy. And now, your golden ticket has been exposed as nothing more than a criminal. The empire you chased doesn't exist." Tiffany's face blanched. Karen sputtered, "Lies. This is slander." But the evidence was irrefutable: photos of Tiffany attending gala dinners with Vance, transfers of money from her accounts to his fraudulent schemes, and public FBI records flashing across the screen. Isabella's eyes flicked briefly toward Ethan, a flicker of surprise breaking through her icy mask. He had dismantled their accusations not with anger, but with facts sharper than any weapon. The aftermath was swift and merciless. Miller Enterprises, already teetering, collapsed under Rick Vance's scandal. Karen, unable to bear the humiliation and stress, suffered a stroke, leaving her bedridden. Tiffany found herself drowning in debts, abandoned by friends who once fawned over her. As security escorted them out of the mansion, Ethan spoke his final words to Tiffany without a shred of pity. "You tried to bury me, Tiffany. But it's your greed that destroyed you." For the first time, Isabella looked at Ethan not as a pawn, but as a man with a past, and a will forged in fire. After the confrontation with Tiffany and Karen, the atmosphere in the Sterling mansion shifted. Isabella, once cold and suspicious, began to look at Ethan differently. In the past, she would probe and question his background relentlessly, as if every inquiry were a weapon. But now, after seeing him expose the truth with her own eyes, she chose silence and observation. One evening, in the soft glow of the library's golden lamps, Isabella placed a stack of financial reports on the desk in front of Ethan. They came from a struggling branch of the company. She didn't issue an explicit request, but her eyes conveyed it clearly: "Read this and tell me what you see." Ethan caught the silent signal, a faint smile curving his lips. From that moment, their relationship began to transform. They were no longer just husband and wife bound by a contract. Isabella quietly acknowledged him as a partner in her corporate battles. They exchanged ideas in hushed voices, dissecting contracts and strategies behind closed doors. To outsiders, Isabella remained the formidable CEO, while Ethan was merely the ordinary husband she had taken in. Yet in private, they were like two chess masters, studying every move on a board where the stakes were control and survival. Occasionally, Isabella would catch herself staring at him, struck by how swiftly he grasped complex issues. Legal loopholes, market manipulation, hidden traps. Ethan could spot them after just a glance at a few pages. What surprised her most was that he wasn't greedy, nor did he boast of his insights. Instead, he calmly offered suggestions, always leaving the final decision in her hands. Late one night, after finishing a grueling virtual meeting, Isabella poured herself a glass of wine. She looked at Ethan across the table and said quietly, "You're not who I thought you were." Ethan's lips curved into a faint smile. "I was never the man you assumed. But one thing is certain, I won't let anyone harm you or this company." For a fleeting moment, the invisible wall between them cracked. Trust, fragile yet undeniable, was beginning to take root. Isabella no longer viewed Ethan as a burden. He was becoming her silent ally. And from this point forward, the game itself was changing, a new chessboard quietly unfolding before them.